Hey everybody, welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest. It's the podcast where us four backlot boys view and review every single Palme d'Or winner. My name is Timo. I'm of course joined by Abram, Tucker, and Tanner. And today we are talking about the 1997 winner of the Cannes Film Festival, which is Abbas Kiarostami's film Taste of Cherry from Iran, a country I have not seen any movies from actually before this one. But promises to provide some inspiring intellectualisms from the four of us during this episode. But
Sure.
yes,
Let's hope.
let's hope.
That's the goal, usually.
We hope to inspire and intellectualize.
That is right. Before we get into that, though, and dive into the deeps of whatever this film is, we got to review what we talked about last time, because we reviewed Barton Fink, the Coen brothers film from the same decade, actually, earlier in the 90s, but it got a 8.1 out of 10, which put it at the third spot on our list of 4 movies. So now we do the 5th movie and add a 5th movie to the list. That's the name of our game today here. So, without any further ado, I want to hear some first impressions about this film, Taste of Cherry. Did you taste it or not? Abram, I want you
Can
to
I
tell me.
actually hijack real quick?
All
Because I
right.
gotta say,
Oh,
we
Lord.
need to do recaps. We need to consistently do recaps
Okay.
on this show. Because we
Fair
can't
enough.
expect people to know the story of Taste of Cherry.
Sure, sure,
last
sure.
time
We should
we're
probably
watching,
explain a
we're
little
watching
bit.
Fair enough.
Casablanca, we're watching all this nonsense of people
Yeah.
seeing
Cavalcade.
Titanic. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But Taste of Cherry is a film...
we did do recaps sometimes.
Sometimes.
On the previous quest, too.
No, we did, but we haven't done since we restarted here.
It's
And
true.
these films
It's true.
are less popular. They're less known. And frankly, even to the four of us who are pretty familiar with movies, especially for people of our age, this is a movie I knew nothing about, even to the point where I'm starting the movie and I'm lost because I have no idea what's going on. Actually, I believe that happened a couple times ago. Oh, no, with Anatomy of a Fall. I thought it was Zone of Interest.
Yeah, that's right.
I digress.
Some dude didn't read the one sentence summary when we booted it up on HBO Max.
It's
Or
true.
excuse me, just Max.
Yeah.
The one to
but
watch.
anyway,
The one to watch.
Abbas Kiarostami's Taste of Cherry is about a guy named Mr. Badii, and he is driving around and he's picking up people and he's talking to people, and frankly, that's the whole movie. But the context becomes, who is he? Why is he driving around? And what you discover is that he has a plan to end his life, and he has thought this thing really through. He knows this plan beat for beat, and he wants to find someone to assist him with ending his life, and he wants to drive out to this tree on a hill, sit in a hole overnight, take a bunch of sleeping pills, and whoever ends up being his assistant, his suicide assistant, will come to him in the morning, make sure he's dead or alive, help him out of the hole if he's alive, and bury him if he's dead. And the entire process of the movie is him visiting people around the city that he's in and trying to see which one will go through with that for a large sum. And that's kind of it. We drive around the countryside, we talk to a few characters, and then we float off into the ether at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Did I do that justice?
You did that
pretty,
justice.
pretty
All right,
straightforward.
great.
Abram, what did you think of Taste of Cherry?
I mean, to be blunt, I found it to be staggeringly boring. I it's interesting, right? Because I don't go to church, but I do use Letterboxd, and they feel like similarly reverent
Comparable.
activities.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Um,
yeah. It's
and
really
this
spiritual.
And this is a film that is extremely, extremely well enjoyed.
Number 125 on the Letterboxd top 250.
Interesting. I actually didn't know that. I just knew that there was a big old stack of 4-star ratings and a almost as big stack of 5-star ratings, and I just didn't see it. And one of the top reviews from somebody whose name I don't remember is like, it really is a bummer when I'm entirely unable to connect to a film. And I think that aptly sums up my emotional thoughts on Taste of Cherry, which is to say I don't really have any. I didn't find it particularly moving. I think I'd like to get into why. I think it's partially a scripting issue for me, but I think it's also partially just a filmic one, as we
Yeah.
can talk about. But even if we move beyond my lack of emotional connection, I just think that this is a surprisingly shallow film for what it's trying to tackle. Because, and to be reductive here, and then we can complicate this point a little bit, but how far we can even complicate it, I'm not sure. It almost feels like the thesis of Taste of Cherry is just be happier, man. Just be optimistic, right?
Yeah,
Everyone's
yeah.
kind of bummed out. If everybody killed themselves and they were bummed out, there'd be no people left. And Taste of Cherry, to be clear, is a little bit more than that. But
Yeah.
I think that we don't begin to really peel back any layers or begin to operate in a very compelling way until we're maybe 30 minutes from the end of the film and we are introduced to a very pivotal character. But by that point, for me, it's too late. I think that there's just way, 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 way too much what feels like pointless pontification, to use a couple p words for you there. So I'm curious what you guys think, but it was just ultimately a misfire for me, and I kind of scratching my head as to what I was really supposed to take away.
Yeah.
Okay. One of you two, Tucker or Tanner, want to take it
You
away?
know, I'll talk about this old chestnut. Taste of Cherry is a film I should like. It is a small area movie. He's in his car for basically the entire time. It's very focused on a core set of characters, and it has a very compelling premise. Someone driving around the countryside trying to get someone to assist him in a suicide, and that on that level, once I found out the movie was about that, I was like, yes, like we're gonna get some really deep character study here. It's gonna be super focused, minimal, sets and stuff. And we do get some of that, but I do think I agree with Abram on terms of characterization and thematics. I feel like this film doesn't live up to its simple premise. It delivers the bare bones of that, but I was really hoping to find it deeper. And so I leave this film thinking it's really interesting that they made this, that it is as simple and as focused as it is, that it does tackle an interesting idea. But I do think that in terms of the characters that we meet and what we end up learning about Mr. Badii, it's not. I don't feel like I learned that much, and I kind of agree with Abram that the thematics, at least from a first viewing, and of course we'll be digging into it deeper here, it feels pretty simple. Which is interesting because it feels like a film that is structurally simple but should be thematically deep. But I found it to be both structurally and thematically simple, and so that was I agree with Abram. It's an interesting film, but I think I also agree it was kind of a misfire for me.
Timo,
Tanner?
you go.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'll go. I actually do like this movie. I enjoyed it quite a lot while watching. I thought it's so beautiful and kind of poetic in a bit inscrutable way. And I thought that the the foreignness of it, that this film is depicting stuff that is so outside of my realm of understanding of we're in a culture that I don't understand. We're in a place that I've really never learned very much about. We're taught some things about Iran in school and general life in America, but we don't learn really what it's like to live there at all. And
No, we
so
don't.
to me, the way that this film grabbed me was through that kind of lens at the beginning, and was very interested in seeing what is this city like, what is this guy's life, and as we figure out, what he's trying to do, we I began asking lots of questions to myself about him and trying to, as these other characters are he's interacting, like figure out who this guy was. And while I think that the film plays its hand very, very close to its chest in who Mr. Badii like really is, I don't even think they really ever like let on to what's really going on with him. The stuff that the ways I think that the three characters he interacts with come to talk about suicide and how the three of them react differently is very interesting to me. And I think that, it's a slow movie. This is pretty far away from like a pulpy best picture winner is
Yeah.
like, uh, well, I don't know. They're not all like that. Some of them are artsy too, but this is very art house
This is
compared
the most
to,
art housey movie we've reviewed
I
on
think
this
so.
channel,
Yeah.
without a
Um,
shadow of doubt.
so I was kind of taken aback by it, and in its I think in its simplicity, but in its also just like visual poetry. And there are scenes in this that like were really taking me away. I was like, wow, oh my god. Towards I think it's a ramp. It gets better towards the end. The last 30 minutes are definitely the best 30 minutes, but it's only an hour and a half long, so that's like a third of the movie, and it doesn't really take you that long to get to the end to begin with. Tanner.
Sure. Yeah.
Your
So
turn.
I wanted Timo to go before me because I just wanted to know if we were going to go 4 for 4 on like if we were going to be a Wendy's 4 for 4 on being like, yeah, I don't know about this one because that's where I kind of land too. And I thought I was thinking about this film a lot today as I am off to do. I realized with these Palme d'Or winners, and as I thought about it, I began to soften on it a little bit. But my overarching feeling is still that I find it to be a little bit impenetrable. I think is the word I would use. That I feel that there's that Kiarostami obviously injected a lot of stuff into Taste of Cherry. Lots of I wouldn't maybe use the word pontificating Abram, maybe more contemplative on the human condition and why should we live and what's the meaning of life and the ethics of suicide and so on and so forth and how that intertwines with the Islamic faith, which I find very interesting as a section of this film when he's talking to the seminarist.
Yeah, second guy.
Yeah. So I think there is some really interesting conversation to be found here. But at the same time, I do feel that we are lacking some characterization for Mr. Badii. And while I realize that he is maybe supposed to be more of a canvas for the audience to project themselves onto and to sort of fill the shoes of in the narrative, to sort of
He's like Link.
Yes, to sort of paint our sort of, I don't know, maybe our more depressive attitudes or cynicism towards life onto, and then in turn get those turned around and learn some things about the world. I still found it to be, I'm just going to circle back and say, yeah, kind of impenetrable in that way. And I don't want to say inaccessible, but that's why I would say sort of impenetrable for me in that, like, I couldn't find the right angle to come at this from to really envelop myself in it and really take it to heart.
Well, why don't we start with our main character, Mr. Badii, and because I think an important part of his character is actually how little we know about him and how much time the film takes to tell us basically anything and how much we have to infer about him rather than is simply told or that he tells about himself to other people. So what do you guys think about his character and how his character is developed, starting from the first moment we meet him in the movie, which is like the beginning?
Well, that opening sequence is really interesting because it does properly set the tone in terms of being very slow, quiet, and simple. I do think that distinct of an opening, I think it's like the first maybe 10 minutes, is just him driving around and sort of vignettes of people's lives, mostly in poverty and just trying to get by and asking for food and arguing and trying to get work. That does, I think, set the stage very nicely in terms of I want to say world building. That's more of the video game term, but the atmosphere of the film that it takes place in. But I also think that it was kind of an immediate sign to me that this was going to be a style of film pacing and storytelling that doesn't really grab me, because I've talked often about how, while there are the occasional slow or sort of ethereal movies that will grab me, it's very, very rare for that to happen. And I'm much more of a hit you in the face with something crazy and back and forth, snappy, Howard Hawks dialogue. That's the kind of thing that really grabs me. And just seeing people around Iran in poverty, I thought was filmically interesting, and I can certainly understand the artistic value in it. But it was kind of a sign to me immediately, like, I don't know what's going on here. Like, I can infer, like, okay, poverty and people trying to get work and Iran in general, but it wasn't until we learned the actual premise of the film, which again is not until like maybe 20 or more minutes into the movie, that he wants to end his life. That's when my ears perked up. I'm like, that's an interesting premise. And
but hear someone's gonna kill himself, and he's like, oh boy, here we go.
Well, in the context of this film,
of course,
absolutely,
I know what
because
you mean.
up to that point, it was him just driving around, and be like, hey, where you from? Hey, what's your job? And I'm like, I don't know who you are. I don't know who they are. I don't know why you're here. And so I found it very hard at the beginning to be invested in any of the conversations or any of the actions of the characters because they were such blank slates and I knew so little about them that I do feel the same as Tanner. At the beginning of part of the film, I found very impenetrable. And uh, Mr. Badii, I think, does become more and more interesting. I agree with you, Timo, in terms of it being a ramp across the course of the film. But that opening, I don't know, it didn't really work for me.
Yeah, I wrote down some notes on the beginning of the film, about sort of like trying to wrap my head around and get an idea of what the film was going to be. And so I wrote down, that he was largely talking to people who seemed, down on their luck. I think desperation is an overarching feeling at the beginning of this film, both from his side of things and from outside the window. I mean, that very first shot is a group of workers, of laborers, as they call them, just sort of like coming up to his car and he's like, "How many people do you need? You're looking for help? You're looking for labor? How many people do you need?" And he just sort of like drives off because he's looking for something very particular. Um, and of course, we learn later what that particular thing is that he's not only looking for, a singular person who seems, maybe more desperate and would be willing to take him up on this proposition, but I think he's also looking for someone who shares a sorrow with him. I think has a similar sorrowfulness in their life. I think that we get that in the soldier in particular, the first person that he really talks to and like takes on the ride up to the mountain in the tree and the ditch that he's going to bury himself in. Man, like when you get the real sense of like this kid, I think what they say, he's like 16 years old. Like his heart is not really in this whole military service thing. He sort of tells his tale of like how some familial trouble sort of pushed him into this. So I think that's what I gleaned from the beginning of that film and about Mr. Badii and how he relates to these other characters that we meet over the course of the film.
I think there's also something to be said in the in that opening sequence that you don't really, I think, come to grasp until first you meet the child soldier and then the later characters, which is I feel like that opening sequence really puts us as a viewer in a similar position to that of the people that Mr. Beatty picks up. In that, I feel like there's this great sense of uneasiness to particularly the first act of the film,
Huh.
and I think that that uneasiness is sort of captured in this opening sequence fairly well, as we are in some ways quite intimately close to this man, our protagonist, because the camera often is returning to this same like side profile shot of him in the driver's seat. We
Yeah.
become very familiar with like him as a physical being, right? But we don't get too deep inside of his psyche. But really, none of the people he meets until perhaps the last really do. So
Yeah.
I think there's something to be said for the sense of perspective there, and also maybe something to be said for the characterization you can draw from about him, sort of from contrast of he is driving a nice car. He is driving, what is it, a Range Rover.
Hmm.
His hair is nicely slicked back. He's dressed nice. He's being approached for work. Now, again, to your point, Timo, I have no real cultural understanding of Iran. Now, at the time this film was filmed, at the time where the narrative is taking place, I have none of that. But I think you can start to maybe glean something about his cultural position as well from the opening.
Yeah.
So I think that there is definitely a feeling of intrigue here. And I don't even necessarily take issue on the whole with the fact that our main character's characterization is not particularly personal, in that I think the film is much more interested in trying to universalize ultimately this plight that he's facing. I think a lot of my kind of narrative and character issues enter where we end, and we'll get to the ending in time. But I think there's actually some interesting moves being made in this first 10, 15 minutes.
Hmm. Well, to me, the thing, having finished watching the movie, I do think about his character in kind of a
Good.
Yes, I did finish watching the movie. A whole arc. Like what do we know about him at the beginning and what do we know about him at the end? And I think for me,
Fuck all to less fuck all.
the most notable thing that we know fuck all about is why he's committing suicide, why he
Yeah,
feels
yeah.
that he needs to. And he's pressed on this like once or twice in the movie, and he says that he can't. He can't even talk about it. He won't disclose this information to the people he's writing with. So I, well, what do I make of that? I think that I am actually quite enamored that we don't know this about him because makes it makes me keep like probing the film. I keep asking questions of it. And when it returns those answers about other people, about the third man that he picks up who has tried to commit suicide once before, and he has ideas about why someone would want to do that, but we never, Badii has lots of money, so probably it's not a money issue. It's actually there's seemingly no reason in his characterization for him to commit suicide. And I think that
Yeah.
is part of why we don't know very much about him, is to make it so that we question his decision all the time. And in the same way that all the other characters that he meets react and become confrontational with him when he brings about the idea that he's trying to end his life.
I will also just say to your point, because ambiguity is there's a lot of intentional ambiguity in the film, and I don't think it's ultimately effective. But I do think that through the ambiguity, you can start to parse things. To your point, Timo, of there being something really interesting and trying to really get in there and figure out what's going on, right? Because his suicide plan is extremely interesting because it's not only premeditated, it's public, it's deliberate. He's already dug the hole by the time that he's picking up people, so I think it begins to invite questions of, is this his first day kind of trolling this route for somebody? Has he been doing this for a while? I think that the sense of displacement, again, I don't take particular issue with. I think that, though, if you're going to sort of displace us like this, I feel like there needs to be like a greater universal point. And maybe it's just my own personal inability to sort of sit with the idea that ultimately this very spiritual understanding of gratitude is enough. Because I think that ultimately, for as much as the film might be about that despair, as you're mentioning, Tanner, I feel like the point it tries to impart ultimately, in avoiding any particulars of this is going wrong in a protagonist's life, this is why he's trying to kill himself, this is what he realized about his situation to stop him from doing that. What we learn instead is perhaps there's a sense of gratitude or view of the world that maybe changes his mind. And the maybe is interesting, but
Mhm.
I just don't think I can subscribe to it, which I think is partially personally my own just cynicism as a guy who lives in the world, right?
Sure. Okay.
I guess I'm unconvinced by maybe the case the film makes.
Oh,
for
sure.
him to
The
not kill
case
himself.
for life of
Yeah.
Taste of Cherry. Okay, that's
the,
interesting.
the case for life of a man who is really just that, just a man, of
Yeah.
circumstances we don't know, of a sort of, in a lot of ways, a protagonist for us to see ourselves in, as we were saying
Yeah.
before.
So I just think that the fact that the movie isn't clear about his justification for either staying alive or killing himself, of course, the ending is very ambiguous. But throughout the film, we learn relatively so little about him, and he's right. Yeah, you're right that he's kind of like a blank slate character. I find that to be just a really unfulfilling way to tackle a complex social and emotional premise like this. I mean, the idea is that this guy is clearly going through something so troublesome to him that he's willing to create a plan that not only takes multiple steps, but the help of another person, and continually go to multiple people and be driving around all day in his Range Rover. Like, this is such a big thing to him that he's gone to these steps. And because we learned so little about him, I'm left feeling unsatisfied by any of the potential thematics that you can read into this, because I don't know who he is as a person. I don't know what has caused him to feel this way, what good things in his life that he's forgetting about or leaving behind. The idea of having ostensibly like a blank slate, like, you know, not mute protagonist, but in the video game terms, like a non-speaking protagonist that's just kind of like, write your name on it, you make them the character you want to be. This is a film about something that is very personal to one person's life. And I would much rather be able to universalize through the specifics of his emotional journey by connecting to him on a human level, as opposed to no, being able to connect to him on a human level because I know so little about him. So he becomes ostensibly just kind of an everyman. He doesn't feel like a person to me. He feels like a stand-in for a thematic concept. Like, oh, if you can like put yourself in his mind, you can understand. It's like, no, if I learned about his past, and if I learned about what is causing him this difficulty and where the pros and cons of his life are, I would be much more able to apply those same things to my life by drawing the same tangents to the things that are good and bad in my own life. But as it stands, I don't know. I think should be great for him. I think should be terrible for him. But we have no clue. And I find that to be very emotionally unsatisfying for a film that is about a personal emotional topic. I feel no emotional connection because he doesn't feel like a person.
Yeah, I find that interesting because, obviously we can all agree that Taste of Cherry is not a film that operates in specifics.
No, of course.
It operates as, and I think Tucker, you kind of touched on something that is core to the film, that Mr. Badii and all of the rest of the characters in the film are sort of philosophical stand-ins, I would say.
I would tell the other characters he meets, though, are much more specific. Like, we learn about their past, we learn about where they're from,
Sure, but
their struggles.
I think in their conversations,
of course, yeah.
they stand as like a philosophical opposite or a philosophical foil to Mr. Body's cynicism and suicidality.
Yeah.
And I'd like to talk about them. I don't know if we want to transition into them now, or
Yes,
if we want.
I
to
would
sort
like
of
to talk
maybe
about those
just
guys.
Sure, absolutely. Well, we can start at the beginning with the soldier, I think, because obviously he's the first one. He is the one to which Mr. Body sort of conveys his plan to, and thus to the audience as well. He's the character that Mr. Body talks to, where we learn about his plan, that he's thought about this for a long time, and this is what he's looking for.
Let me tell you, we really learn about that plan. I mean, he probably talks about that plan for like 13 minutes.
Yes, and he talks to this soldier and sort of. I think Abram brought up something too that because essentially we're in the soldier's shoes at that point.
Oh, yeah.
He is the audience stand-in at that point. We're like, Mr. Body knows what's going on and knows that he's about to propose, but we have no idea. And so that like off-kilter, sort of very apprehensive, very fearful demeanor that soldier takes on is very personable in that moment. Yeah. And I think there's quite a bit of that. Maybe more with these passenger characters than there is with Mr. Body himself, where we're like, with the religious character, we're like, yeah, man, there's lots of reasons to not kill yourself. If you are a religious person, you probably find yourself agreeing with these seminarists' points. And then even the taxidermist at the end is like makes the greatest case for not killing yourself, and the case for life and enjoying the pleasures of life and so on and so forth. So I really enjoy all of these characters and what they bring. And again, I find the philosophical foil that they bring to the suicidality and the cynicism quite interesting as well to think about, as I was a lot through the day.
To me, what's so interesting about it is their specific and different reactions to learning about the suicide plan. Like the soldier he's so horrified that he is silent. He speaks so little after he won't get out of the car. He totally disobeys. And if you think about, him being a soldier is someone who would probably be the most comfortable with death. If you're thinking in Mr. Badi's shoes that, he picks up this soldier to bring him back, but also that perhaps out of anyone who's buried somebody, a soldier, maybe not a soldier as young as the one that he finds, but a soldier nonetheless would bury it. But the kid's reaction is totally different. It's
and also someone who's used to following orders, maybe even orders he doesn't agree with.
And so it's very, I think it's telling that the character is so against it, and in a way that Mr. Buddy can't like fight back against. The way that he just like is completely silent, and he just is like, take me back. And then when he eventually runs away. He just runs down the cliff and gets out of there. I think that because even though that like the segment beforehand, we don't learn very much about Mr. Badii, and I don't remember a whole lot about the soldier. I felt very emotionally affected by that specific response. The religious one didn't get me as much because while I was able to read the subtitles and get the ideas about, why Islam says it's a bad idea to kill yourself, I was like, okay, well, yeah, this guy's coming at it from it's a theological perspective, but it's like it's a logical perspective, a theological perspective, maybe.
Theological
Yeah.
perspective.
And then yet the further third reaction, it's like there's abject horror, there's trying to explain it away, explain what you shouldn't do, and then there's compassion and understanding from the third character, and that like progression is feels nice to me. It feels like a good way to go to bring us into thinking about like why is he committing suicide and what is he giving up? Well, we don't even know what he's giving up. What is he like searching for? What is wrong with him? And then but nobody can figure it out and we don't know.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't. Is it that the film operates as a fable or a parable or an allegory? One of those three is right, and I don't know which. It's a language question, but
Mhm.
I think that the point I'm making on a larger level, just insert the correct able in there, is important in that
Allegoriable.
in that that really is, I think, the lens through which I view the film, right? Well, if we think about him as an everyman and we think about these three just sort of disparate figures that walk into his life to impart wisdom and disappear, how different is that really than
Yeah.
I'm just going to go with fable, right?
Sure.
How much different is
I-
that really?
Abram, that's a fantastic point. It's something that I was really thinking about while I was watching the film and afterwards as well. Is like it's structured like I think a parable, because parable implies like a
Statement,
lesson
yeah.
taught,
Yeah,
right?
parable's like a story with a lesson.
We're going to go with parable.
Parable. And I was like, it's very much structured like that, because you can imagine reading this in a book or learning about it in your like literature class or whatever. It's like it's this man, this
Like sort of like a Scrooge type character visited by three people.
well,
His negativity turned around.
but like no, yeah, honestly, kind
sort
of,
of a
but
younger man, a middle-aged man, and an older man. Kinda like-
okay, all right, allow me,
Taste,
Tucker,
taste
allow
of
me.
Christmas Carol.
Yes, but yeah, I mean, it's even
Taste of
structured like,
cranberry?
okay, can I? A soldier, a soldier, a priest for all intents and purposes, and then like I don't, he's a taxidermist, but he's like sort of presented as like this professor as well, or
Yeah.
a teacher of like he even presents his lessons as a teacher, I would kind of say too. So yeah, like you
and
can,
as a father.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can definitely sort of see the parable nature of it and like how these characters are a stand-in for, a young man, a middle-aged man, and an older man, more experienced or something. And then, these different societal roles as a person who follows order, who believes, or who has this greater wisdom and experience. I think that the roles are there, and how again, those conversations I think can provide some quite interesting nuggets as I'd like to get into.
Yeah.
I've got a question for you guys though, because
Yeah.
there is a fourth character we talked to. We talked to the Watchman,
Yeah.
Yes, this is the guard. Yeah,
the
omelet
guard.
the omelet guy.
Yes, who we then come to learn is friends with the seminarist,
Yes.
the priest. I'm curious what you guys sort of make of his role in the narrative, because I don't really know what to think about him.
He's kind of the rest stop. Like
Yeah.
we see him get out of the car for the first time in the film, or
Yeah.
just go somewhere else other than the car. And the conversation he has with him isn't about his suicide or his plan.
Yeah, because he like tries to get him on board.
Yeah,
and he's
but
like,
he doesn't.
I can't. I got a job.
I
I
got
can't
an
go.
omelet cooking.
I got an omelet cooking.
But I do feel like it's kind of just his role is just. And I'm not saying that I particularly like this, but it's kind of just watching Mr. Badii be actually social,
Mhm.
not he's trying to convince him, but the conversation ends up turning to like a bunch of other stuff as
Mhm.
opposed to all the other ones, which get redirected by, hey, I got a plan and some money. Want to
Yeah,
help?
yeah.
And I feel like that for me is an interesting sequence, and it stands out in terms of how it lets us learn a little bit more about Mr. Buddy. But I think that in the structure of the film, that is already so intentionally repetitive. Like we end up
Mhm.
having similar conversations and questions asked multiple times throughout the film. I think I kind of would have wanted more time with the characters of import
Sure.
as opposed to inserting this guy who like lives in this where he's working in this watchtower and he's
Mhm.
making an omelet. It's like I don't know, just go over the hill and talk to my friend. It's
Yeah,
like
well,
Well,
I
okay.
thought well, go ahead, Timo. Sorry.
So part of what their conversation is, correct me if I'm wrong. It's like where the Watchman is from. He's from
Mhm.
Afghanistan, correct?
yeah.
And they talk,
Yeah, same with the seminarist as well.
and the soldier is from Kurdistan, is a Kurd,
Mhm.
right? So there's,
Yes.
I think the
And I
film,
believe the professor at the end is from Azerbaijan.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
think you're right.
and but we don't actually ever learn where Badii is from. So I think that there is a ethnic dimension to this that Kiarostami is exploring here that we
Yeah.
we don't really have an eye
No.
into because we
Of
don't
course.
know nothing
Difficult to read
about the
into, yeah.
differences between Kurds and Afghanis and
Yeah.
Iranis and
And the histories and the wars and the stuff that they
Yeah.
reference. I think that also is part of it being a little bit more
the
difficult for us
war
to
in
get into.
Afghanistan, the one they were talking about, not the United
No.
States involvement in Afghanistan, but
This is a
rather
90s movie.
the
Uh-huh.
Soviet invasion of Afghanistan.
Well, yeah, even like well, he gives a little bit of background when he's talking to the Kurd soldier, which sort of like jogged my memory of like, oh yeah, the Kurds, they're sort of like they don't have really a national border, but they're this group that sort of exists in a lot of countries in the Middle East, and
Mhm.
and he gives some background. He's like, you're a Kurd, you know, you fighting's in your blood, you know, bravery is in your blood, and all this sort of stuff. So. I think that it does clue you into a little bit of that, of those sort of ethnic or national backgrounds of the characters, but not a whole lot. It's certainly not hand holding because it was made for an audience who is a lot more knowledgeable
Yes.
about these things.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
But what was I going to mention? I was the Watchman character,
Yeah.
who watches the Watchman, as well as
Fucking hell.
the laborers who help push his car. They don't push his car off the cliff. They get it off. They get it back onto the road from a cliff. Um, I think that's interesting. And the sort of explanation that I settled on for them, if we're sort of ascribing roles to all of these characters, is that they represent like the actual everyman. And more specifically, you know, if we want to talk about what messages the
really
film's trying to
think that
send away with you,
Badii is an everyman, actually. But Tanner, you continue. But I don't. I think that Badii is not an everyman.
but more specifically that they are like representative of the inherent goodness of, you know, the everyman of mankind, of human beings, because like his car goes off the edge of this road, and then like that all these workers are there, they're smiling, they're having a good time, they're like hup, 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 and they're
Yeah,
like
like
pushing
Pikmin,
his car
yeah.
back up. Like Pikmin. And even the watchman in the tower is like, hey, you want some tea? I'm making an omelet. What do you
Yeah,
want to talk
yeah.
about? Like they are these like very not menial. What's the word?
Congenial.
Congenial. Thank you. Congenial characters who are just like imbuing the film with positivity when realistically speaking Mr. Badii is sort of is emanating like cynicism
Yeah.
about the state of the world and how he views it. So that's kind of how I take them
Sure.
as characters. Just my personal thing, but I don't know if
know,
we
makes
wanted to
sense,
comment
yeah.
on that.
Here's
Sure.
another
that-
thing that I've been thinking about, kind of as we've been talking about the film, and a little bit before, but that Kiarostami is known, and this has been told to me. I haven't seen any of his other films, so I don't know this for sure, but I believe he's very famous for his documentary work, and I think that this film evinces a lot of this like truth, like these are real people in their real environments. That little clip there at the after the end of the movie before the credits
Mhm.
that shows a little bit behind the scenes in which those soldiers are not actors, those are just soldiers that have been, have a day off or are getting enlisted to make this movie. So I think that a lot of these side characters, those vignettes we see at the beginning of the film, these moments there on the side of the road are supposed to make us reflect on the realness of this story. That this is
Oh yeah,
this is a
100%.
story that is taking place in real life with real characters, and that these people, they are our main characters are actors, but I really think the film wants us to dissolve that feeling that this is
It's like a nomad land kind of situation.
Kind of.
No, but
actually,
I
yeah.
do think that's very interesting, and obviously I think it does bring into conversation that beginning that I wasn't quite sold on, but is definitely reflective of basically just documentary filmmaking. I mean, it's impossible to know, or at least it's difficult for us to know at the moment, if those were just captured moments of people around Iran, or if they were actors paid to set up these scenarios. But it does evoke that. But I do think that I find the film to be a little bit at odds with that then, because it does to me feel like the people that we get to know in the film, especially Mr. Badii, are they feel very written to me. Mr.
Sure. Okay.
Badii, in the
Yeah.
fact that we don't know a lot about him, and he kind of, as I said, he doesn't really feel like a person earlier. That is at odds with the very realness of everyone surrounding him, and so then I find the like emotional core of like the realness, and then also the sort of stagey parable nature
Mhm.
of the writing and pacing and characters to be kind of butting up of
Sure.
like it's presented to me like a documentary, but when I'm listening to what the characters are saying and thinking about like the way it's presenting its themes,
Mhm.
I feel like that's like kind of like
Yeah, that's a good point
almost
actually.
fake.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, I think that
Yeah.
there's
That maybe speaks to like maybe all of our disconnect with it, because I think that's a really interesting point to bring up, Tucker, is how that can be a bit of a dissonance, I think, in the film. Sorry, go ahead, Abram.
no, that's okay. I think that there's also something to be said for the ways that we're following a protagonist who I think, yes, is cynical and is obviously depressed, but is also, I think, unable to empathize with people that he meets.
Yeah.
100%.
And-
What
and
does he
I
care
think-
to?
Well, yeah, I guess the ascription of that is an inference at a certain point, but I think it does lend some
Yeah.
credence to Timo's suggestion that this is not just a common person.
Oh, I agree
And
with that. Yeah.
the
Especially considering
class,
what
the
we see of the common
money,
people.
the money, and
Yeah.
and that the film I think makes it a very specific point to tell us how much money he has, how much money he's going to give away, and then
Oh, by the way, doing the math, it buckles out to about $47.
well, you
But in
maybe
Iran in 1997,
maybe something
I don't
like-
know the exact. I saw this online as well. I was doing the research myself, and I was like, how much money in Taste of Cherry does he actually giving these people? It seems that the agreed upon conversion is $47.
yeah, but the spending power of that's not
because
$47.
the film specifically names other things that cost money and other people who have needs for money, and they put that
Yeah.
need in numbers. They say, I need 1,000, I need
Yeah, yeah.
700, or they're, and so
Yeah, buying the tickets at the end. Yeah.
the film is trying to like, at least for international viewers like me, I understand that as like, okay, relatively how much money is this? It's a lot of money. This guy has got
Yeah.
there's something up with him, and that's why I'm so intrigued by this like black box of a character. But Abram, you continue. You were on a point.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talk a lot about how we don't know about him, and I hope to make the case for the fact that I think through that we do learn something. We learn something implicitly about his class position, but I also think that we ought to investigate the, I hesitate to say singular for something, but maybe the most focal detail of his life that we do come to learn, which is he used to serve in the military.
Mm-hmm.
In one of his early and failed attempts to sort of find an interpersonal connection, he is in this very like stiff and in some ways like imposing manner, in a way that is clearly, I think, well acted to communicate this desire to connect but an inability to do it properly, of, hey, this is how I used to count. This is how me and the boys would count when we were out marching.
Yeah.
When we're training, right? It does begin to invite speculation of, okay, if he has a military background, did he do well for himself? Was he promoted up these ranks? Did he gain money that way? Did he become distanced from people as a result? We don't know, but I think when you begin to put together this picture of a guy who is either entirely silent or asking really odd questions of the people he meets. Hey, man, you like being up in this tower by yourself all day? And,
He's a very questiony guy.
Yeah, and I think that you can read that characterization in a way that we're talking about a person here who can't well connect. Or, not wanting to go back to the watchtower, not only because he'd been there before, but because, hey, that guy, eggs don't agree with me, or whatever he says, and moves on. He's making an omelet. He's not a good cook. I don't want the eggs, whatever. I think that when you frame him in this way that I'm just going to refer to in the lightest sense as socially awkward, but then you contextualize the fact that we're told the narrative that he has an excess of money, an excess of time, and not a whole lot else. I think that does say something, and I think it supports what Timo's suggesting of this is a person of a higher class who is in some way being humbled and unable to live the life that maybe he's given. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of course, there's a lot of inferences that you can and potentially are supposed to make about the characters in this film, and I think that's a very interesting case to posit about Mr. Badii. But yeah, I think that is perhaps a strength and perhaps a weakness of Taste of Cherry as well, is that all these inferences thus must be made, because this is maybe more of a closing thought on the film, but while all of this philosophical stuff is in there and can be sort of like grabbed out and examined from many different angles, I almost desire a little bit more something a little bit more narratively substantive about it, I would say.
Yeah.
And that's I question about myself of like, is that something that I really look for a lot in movies like this, or is it because I don't think so? But so then, is it something more? Is it something deeper about this film specifically that makes me feel that way?
Y'all remember the word that I used maybe second to describe it? I think this movie is poetic. It's very poetry like in that it is.
Explains my disconnect.
Yes, this is what I'm getting at. That it is interested in like presenting ideas, like flicking little water droplets of ideas at you, and then not really telling you.
I say don't spray it, Taste of Cherry.
It's like not exactly trying to be like, think this or these characters mean that, but it is just trying to create an environment, a visual, like not melees. What's different? A visual landscape to like exist and be in, and then to think about these ideas of life and death within. And I think that the visuals really are contributing a lot to these philosophical elements that we're talking about. The film, in its like actual filmic construction, is supporting these thematic ideas that we've been talking about. And my favorite scene in the movie has no dialogue at all. It's the quarry rock crushing scene.
Of course,
in which he gets to this point. It's before he finds the taxidermist. He is so distraught. This plan, it seems like it's not actually working, and he goes and he wanders away into this like rock crushing area, and we see image after image after image of his shadow being buried by rock slides and rocks being poured on top of it. And to me, I'm like, this is artsy fartsy film art, but like it's working for me very well in this moment, because I'm understanding what his emotions are, his despair, his wish to die in that moment. That it's just not only is he thinking about his own suicide, but here in the moment, he's like seeing himself be buried. He's seeing his shadow be buried. Like filmmaking like that is very powerful, and that was the kind of the moment where I was like, "Ooh, I'm into this." Happened earlier in the film, but that was the cementation of it. The where in which I was encrusted upon. Not what the.
ensconced.
Yeah, I was like, I like this movie. I was like, this is really cool.
I don't
Like,
know.
this is getting to me. So
Yeah, it's really really good visual storytelling in that scene, and I also really love that scene. I would also maybe characterize it as my favorite of the movie, just because it breaks up like the
Visual
the
sameness.
the back and forth conversations in a car that are the bulk of this film, and it's very visually clear. It's like very direct in what it's conveying to you, and even in that moment, Kiarostami's direction and camera movement, or maybe lack thereof in that moment, are all very 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 well done, obviously, and how the framing is very good in that. And Ershadi's performance, it is wordless, but he carries that despair on his face, and like he seems perhaps even more dejected than he has up until that point in the film, just because he's been shut down in his proposition twice now, and he's like, "Am I ever going to find someone to assist me in this?" You even feel maybe there's an element of like, is there an element of cowardice in me asking people to help me out with this? I just like what he like it's all backgrounded by this visual language of like he wants to like just be buried, just be done, just be out of the world and
Yeah.
become one with the earth. And it's visually interesting, Timo, for a little sound talk. I think it's the most audibly interesting part of it too.
'cause the rocks
Because
tumbling noise is just so
the it's all
unique.
very naturalistic audio in this film. Obviously, it's a lot of wind rustling, animal sounds, stuff like that. But this one is like it's a cacophony of these like rocks tumbling down hills. In Timo, as I pointed out, because I pointed to you when you said cemented, it's a cement like factory or cement plant or whatever you want to call it. Is actually where he's at.
Hmm.
That's also an interesting. There's a small dialogue exchange there when he's told to move his car, but I
Mhm.
think also tells us something about his position in the world, because when he's approached as somebody that would want to buy cement. Hey, if you want to go buy
Yeah,
cement, you
exactly.
got to go over there, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's important. But I also think something I took away from that scene, which is maybe more, again, me projecting into it something, but there, I almost read him watching the sand being poured and the rocks being crushed. Of okay, well maybe I don't even need a person to do this. Maybe I go lie
Yeah,
down
that
in the
I
too.
was
quarry.
thinking about that
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
And I think that that is interesting if you can subscribe to my reading that this is a guy who has an inability to connect to people.
Mhm.
And is would it be fitting to just be buried alive by a machine instead of a person? And I think that almost does tee us up a little bit for his next attempt, which is with the taxidermist, and interestingly, is not convincing the taxidermist. That we come in from black, if I remember, with the
Yeah,
dialogue to the effect
we
of, "Yeah, I'll
drop
do it."
in the middle of that kind of in the middle of that conversation where the taxidermist is already on board for the plan. He's
Yeah,
talked about it with him, and he's like, "All right, I'm not crazy about this idea, but he has this really interesting line that's like, "W- what are you as a man if you can't like help out your fellow man, even if you disagree with like the mode or the imperatives there."
yeah,
I feel the moral human need to help you in this time of your deep need.
yeah. And I want to talk about his mulberry story, because
Okay.
Mhm.
his mulberry story, I think, kind of gets
This is
to
the
the
ending.
heart.
I really want to talk about this ending and what he has to
Yeah.
say. Continue.
And again, this goes back to my tension of maybe what the film is saying is just not enough for me personally, and thus I
Mhm.
have a disconnect from it. But what he is talking through in this mulberry story, and he reduces it down to the simple idea of, I got up in the morning to commit suicide, and I came home with a bushel of mulberries, right? And my takeaway from the story, and I'm curious if you guys had the same, is there is intrinsic beauty to the world, and
Yeah.
that you must find it, and you must become content with that. And
Yeah.
in some ways, again, if we continue to read us as having a protagonist who is of a higher class, of a material wealth, is not content with that, there is probably a resonance in, okay, what I need to do is I need to just appreciate. I need to feel gratitude. I need to feel a spiritual gratitude and appreciation, as this taxidermist did, and find a way to keep living. I personally, as a viewer, find that to be an ultimately overly simple and reductive idea. But this is also me as somebody who is in no way spiritual, unless you count watching Nintendo Directs as a spiritual activity, right? So I think that's an
Some
important,
do, some do.
and I think two of them are on this panel. But I think that is an important that's an important note, right, for my viewing of it. But ultimately, that is what the film for me is trying to express as the reason
Yeah.
he's still alive.
hmm
And I guess I didn't need all of the wind up for that swing, but maybe I'm missing something.
Here's what
Yeah,
I think
well-
about the swing is that it is not a home run swing. We don't know what happens at the end. I think that the idea of
exactly.
um the the taxidermist waking up that morning, or not he's like stays up all night in the tree or whatever, and he sees the sunrise, and that is part of his story of the first kind of moments of his awakening to spiritual gratitude, which I think Abram is actually a totally, that is a really good reading of what this film is trying to get us to accept as a way to keep living. But for Mr. Badii, like it starts raining right at the end, and so
Yeah.
and the moment in which there's conflicting things. Does he kill himself? Does he not? We don't know. I don't actually want to know. I think that the film gives us this little hint. He says when he goes back to the taxidermist and he says, really make sure that I'm dead. Like, throw the rocks at me to make sure that I'm either awake or not. Like, I might be sleeping, I might still be alive. That would indicate that he's not going to kill himself. That going back, wanting someone to be there to look after him, to make sure that he's not dead. But I don't think we see him take the pills. I don't think we hear him really
there's
take
a
the
cut.
pills.
Yeah.
And so there is this large amount of ambiguity that makes me believe that while the film is saying you need to be happy with what life gives you, and that there is beauty in the world, and you have to find it. For this man, he might not be able to find it, and he might not be able to come to that same understanding as the taxidermist. And even though that's a very sad place for the film to end, I am okay with it ending there because of, I think, of Urshadi's performance and the desperation and the very, very depressive attitude that he has throughout the film. It seems like it's a place it could end up. It could end up in either place, logically, in my mind. And by not knowing that, it leaves it open ended in a way that actually is satisfying, because I don't I don't really want to have that thesis that he presents actually be confirmed or denied, that what you need in life is spiritual gratitude.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that what you need in life? Is that what I need in life? Like, Abram says he's not super spiritual, and so there is probably another thing in life that fulfills him in that way and keeps him going. So if we answer that question of, is this the thing to keep going, I almost think that defeats asking it.
I think you're right, and it's interesting you say that because as soon as I finished watching the film, my knee jerk reaction is I do not like that we do not know what happened to him, and I still don't understand the camcorder footage of the filming of the production. I want to talk about that.
Yeah.
But I think you make a good
I think
point.
it's also that camcorder footage matters also in the textual reading of the film, but yes.
Sure. But I think you make a good point, and I think that there is actually something quite contemporary about your notion that I think is a good one, which is ultimately what we have here is a trio. Well, the soldier is interesting, and I don't think that the relationship with the soldier operates in the same way as the second two do, but at least the second two are offering both sort of intellectual, if we can categorize like biblical study as intellectual, and I'm going to for what we're talking about here, an intellectual reason to not commit suicide, and then a very personal emotional reason not to. And what the film, I guess in its ambiguity, is saying is that you can make these cases, but you cannot dictate the life of this person. And in some ways, I think, and this is me just off the cuff, trying to think
Off
about the
the
movie.
dome right now.
But it is kind of interesting if the premise of the film is in large part a religious one of God is giving you your body, and then he decides when to take it away. If the ending of the film suggests that maybe it's not, maybe if the film doesn't even posit yeah, you should live for this reason, you should live for that reason. Just kind of says, fuck it. You got to choose if you're going to live or die. Or you got to make that you got to make the assumption, whatever. It is in some ways an interestingly it's interestingly in opposition with this idea that there is a defined birth and death that you must prescribe to and live out.
Toga, did you want to jump in?
No.
Okay, so you were trying to get a word in edgewise, but then also I think we moved about 15 points down the road
Yeah,
from
it's
there.
okay. Don't worry about it.
The ending is ambiguous, but here's what I'm gonna say: it's ambiguous in the wrong way. Because don't get me wrong, I love an ambiguous ending to a film. Don't get me wrong, folks. Hey,
Like a Barton Fink kind of ending.
exactly. Are you getting me wrong? Because don't get me wrong, I love an ambiguous
I would
ending.
never get
Okay.
you wrong.
Okay, there you go. But far be it from me to explain, to sort of like try to tell a Palme d'Or winning director how to improve the ending of his film.
That's the whole
But
point of the show. Okay. I give you
if I
permission.
if I may, I think the ending would have been a lot more effective for me personally. Let's frame it like this: if perhaps we had, not seen him, like, even though I love the imagery of seeing like the lightning flash on his face and hearing the rain, and then like interspersed with this like complete pitch darkness, I love that imagery. But if perhaps we had seen the taxidermist walking up to the hole and, I don't know, throwing stones at him or whatever as he asked, but like just like walking up to the hole and then we end there, so we don't know if he's alive or dead, or if we ended even on a previous shot of him sitting on the hillside. Maybe he stands up. We don't know if he's going to walk down to the ditch. We don't know if he's going to turn back to go to his car. We cut right there. I think there are some better places for this movie to end that it either shows us or tells us it tells us will happen in the world of this film that would feel better filmically and narratively, I think. Just based on like I don't even know, just like giving you a better sense of what happens to Mr. Badii. Because ultimately, I think the film is telling us that yes, you find these small moments. Abram, I think your reading is correct there, and I think there's some filmic things, some cinematography things that tell us this visually, of like, yes, you find the small things in life to enjoy, and you grab onto those because that's where enjoyment from life comes from, is the small moments where you have to absorb the beauty of the world, absorb the kindness of your fellow man, and that's what life is. But I think there are endings that maybe don't undercut that lesson, that theme near as much as our ending does.
Can I go sicko mode for a second?
Yes, please.
Oh Lord, he's gonna go sicko mode.
Indel, I want to hear this. Go.
Because Tanner, I think with what you were saying, it had me begin to wonder, okay, why does it end with him in the ground opposed to him on the hill, as you're saying, or anywhere else? And I'm spitballing, but I think to your Timo, you've kind of forced me to change my perspective a little bit on the film by considering it to be quite poetic. I think if you gotta think about the rain in particular, right? He is buried. He's getting into the ground, and it's raining in the desert. And rain, it could be a couple of things. It could be an emotional catharsis and release. It could also be this idea of the rain rejuvenating the desert. That's what rain does when it rains in the desert, right? So, is there a way that you could actually suggest, Tanner, that the ambiguity at the end isn't actually ambiguity of him being alive or not, or these various visual and dialogue cues that actually, yes, he's in some way born again, refreshed with the rain. Because you also point out the dialogue, Timo, that was my favorite exchange in the entire film, of this sort of pleading, almost like hopeful, hanging on to life. Please throw the rocks at me. Please come shake my shoulder. I think if you take that, you combine that with the reticence of these incredibly long sequences of him getting ready to leave in the taxi to the desert, and then you take rain as a metaphor in its ecological function in the ways that it's used in other literary form to suggest a rebirth or a renewal or something. I think you could maybe also read the ending of it's maybe not that ambiguous at all.
That's fair too. Yeah.
Alive.
But at the same time, I kind of feel like it's such a stark change from like the bright sun of the rest of the film that and then there's a lot of like beauty derived from these landscapes and
But think about I think the
the
colors.
daytime.
I'm gonna weave in that ending clip because the ending clip shows us that the landscape actually doesn't really look like it does in the film in real life. Those camcorder footage shows the scenes that they shot with the army units marching around, um,
Hmm.
and it's green. It is very verdant. It is not a desert-looking scene at all. But the color timing of the film, which is an intentional choice, as in I think like literally everything else in the film, while it feels documentarian, and I think there are some documentarian like moments we were talking about earlier. The rain being there at the end, him being in like going in there and that being our last moment is such an intentional choice. And the intentional choice to make it seem so desert like and so dry and to always have the dust and the rocks and like the brown grass, that is leading us to believe, I think, that maybe Abram is right, that this is a rejuvenation and a springtime or something of a rebirth there at the end. And that final, like, extra textular clip, it's the soldiers counting, right? It's it's like a recollection of the moment that Badii himself says was his happiest in life.
Hmm.
So the thing that the film, he is either reborn or he either dies, but the thing that we get as our final image and our final thing to think about is the soldiers counting their way, 1, 2, 3,
Yeah.
4. What does that mean? I think it means something, but it certainly is poetic.
Yeah.
And
Um.
I do just want to underscore that I still don't think that camcorder footage works very well for me. I think, and again, on a very personal level, I find it very hard to make sense of. Again, you're right, Timo. It's poetic, and I really like the reading you suggest, but I just have a hard time getting something from it. So maybe the more accurate version of my opening statement. Oh my God, Tanner, I can't believe I'm about to
Yes.
say this.
Oh.
Is that the film is mostly impenetrable, but you're helping me penetrate it the more we talk about it. And
Okay.
I'm gaining a deeper understanding for it. But
Hey, Abram, I'm always glad to help you penetrate something. Okay, pal.
and
Just call me anytime.
God.
I have speed dial. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm making more sense in the movie as we talk about it more. But I
Sure.
think
Yeah.
also as we wind down, I want to reiterate that I did find it boring. I just want to be
Okay.
clear about that.
It's not an action-packed film.
And I want to raise a stylistic reason why that is. As we're on our way out, I find that the feels to me to be an over reliance on this very static shot, reverse shot, framing and camera work in the car where we are for most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
To me, is just static in a way that is one of the moves that leaves me disconnected. Because I think there's some really beautiful. Well, I say beautiful. I mean, the film was like shit on HBO Max.
Oh
I
my
don't know
God,
why.
it's a terrible
It-
transfer.
It's a really bad
transfer.
transfer. Can we? Let's take a moment.
Yeah.
Let's take a moment and just
The
slam
the
Max for
smearing,
a second,
man. There's so
shall
much.
we?
Like,
yeah,
there's-
even
The
the
subtitles. It was
subtitles are
ridiculous.
wiggling, yeah.
It was
It's-
ridiculous.
subtitles are
We
not
should have
supposed
watched it
to.
on Criterion, but it was just easier for us to
Yeah.
watch it on Max at a moment's notice.
Bad.
But
It's
I mean,
bad.
I hope that the Criterion transfer is better because it's in the
Has to
Criterion
be.
collection.
It has to be.
Has to. But like, yeah, like when they're driving, like his nose and like his face is like distorting against the background. It's like, how do you even mess it up that badly?
It's actually it was a little distracting. I was thinking about it a little more than I would have liked to been, given that
Yeah.
I was trying to enjoy the movie, and it was like,
I even thought it was our fancy schmancy TV settings,
Yeah.
but no, it's just a bad transfer.
Yeah.
screw you, Warner
Yeah.
Brothers.
Screw you, David Zaslav. You did this personally, and I know you did.
He asked for the bad transfer.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, that looked too
Put
good.
the bad one on there for this art movie. Or whatever. I assume that's what he sounds like. I want to talk about the seminarist briefly,
Okay,
if I may.
just briefly.
And I know, Tucker, you're a bit of a religion head. You find religion
I
interesting.
do. Yeah, I took a class.
Exactly. So this is my point. Because obviously none of us are experts in Islam. So but I did want to touch on this in just the conversation that they have because I find Mr. Body's like rebuttal of the seminarist's points very interesting. Because he provides this thing of like, well, the Quran tells us not to harm our bodies. Our bodies are created by God, and so they are sacred in His image, in His creation. And Mr. Body comes back at him with this very interesting sort of Uno reverse card, if you will, where he's like, but God also doesn't want us to suffer. And so logically, he allowed us to have the option to take ourselves out of this world. Just a very interesting, like, moral and religious, like, back and forth, I found.
Yeah.
For someone who's, again, not religious or spiritual.
And the part where he says, it's not a sin for soldiers to kill each other, but it is a sin for me to kill myself. Like,
Hmm.
that's another, like, well, yeah. How does the religion come back from that? He didn't really have a great answer. I felt for that rebuttal. Okay.
I wrote down one quote from this film, which was, he says to him, if I wanted a lecture, I'd have turned to someone with more experience.
Yeah.
Tone down the sass, Mr. Body. Turn down the sass.
Mm.
Any closing thoughts from anybody?
I think at the end of the day, I find this film interesting to discuss, but kind of in my mind for the wrong reason. I really like that we were able to have a great conversation about the ambiguity and the way that the shot composition and line delivery might imply certain things, and the fact that it is static in some areas, and I find that interesting. But on a very personal level, I feel like we could have had those same kind of conversations with a more narratively clear film.
Yeah.
A film that is slightly less repetitive, that has a little bit more going on in terms of its explanation of its main character. I'm not even saying I would rather a less ambiguous ending, because I actually don't necessarily have the problem with the ending being ambiguous, but I find the fact that the bulk of the runtime is ambiguous and a lot left up to the imagination to be a little bit frustrating, because I feel like these same conversations and points can be drawn from something that is more specific. I often find the most emotionally resonant stories and the most that I get out of personally, in terms of what I learned from them, how I'm able to apply those to understanding the minds of other people, to be the ones that are the most specific. Understanding someone in their most personal way, knowing their full history, knowing what goes into them making certain decisions, I find that to be what allows me to take the most out of a film, as opposed to having to make inferences because the movie is intentionally vague in so many areas. I find that to be a pretty distanced way to understand and discover emotional universality, which is, I think, usually the goal of art, is to communicate feeling, communicate these things. But I find this style of communication to be very cold, and impersonal in a like kind of annoying way, especially because I was honestly ready as soon as we get to that first scene where they park on the hill, not the first scene, but the first scene where he's talking to the soldier. They park on the hill, and he's like, "This is the plan." He goes through it step by step. That's the kind of movie I like, where things are very intentional, where it's the setup and payoffs and that kind of stuff. And I was like, okay, so it's got a slow opening, but boom, we're in it. Like, my mind was like, this is going to be a conversation about this, kind of like Mass, where it's like going step by step through all the things, and like learning about how he feels about this, how the other person feels about this, what we're going to see him lay down the hole and then think about it, and then see the process of this, kind of like 127 hours. Like, I was creating my version.
He'll see a giant inflatable Scooby-Doo, like 127 hours.
But I was creating a version of this movie in my mind that was, ooh, okay, we're really going to learn a lot about him. And the idea of him having this planned suicide is so fascinating, because it's going to allow us to learn so much about him and then allow us to extract more out of that. But instead, the film opts for taking very specific and like step-by-step approach when he's explaining that. But otherwise, it's a lot more about vagary themes and people standing in for ideas and stuff. And I just don't really care about that. Like, I love the ideas that this presents, and the premise is so fascinating. And I think that the performances are very good and the direction is very good, but the execution of it I find just to be so just like washed away in the wind. Like I would have so much more to grab onto with the themes of suicidality and the meaning of life and connecting to people if I knew about this fucking character. If I knew what was going on with him. But I don't, and intentionally so, but that I just found it to be incredibly frustrating.
Sure.
It means it kind of just leaves my mind with a puff, like, could mean anything, mean anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's not often that I find myself asking questions of the movie while I watch the movie. And this is a film that
Sure.
did that for me. Made me think about these questions. Who is this character? It got to me on like an analytical level while I was watching it. And I think that as a piece of art, this is much more art than it is entertainment, that it really succeeds to be thought-provoking and challenging too, in ways of understanding and getting at that for me are really fun actually to watch and enjoy. And so, well, it's probably because I do, I can stand a little poetry from time to time. It works for me as art, and like the artistic value of this film to me is very, very high. And while I hear what you guys are saying about the narrative and all that, I think that it is so specific and so intentional, and I just feel the direction throughout the film, through its whole runtime, that I'm really, I really like it. It does a lot for me, despite it being sparse and boring. Like it's boring. You're right, Abram. The shot reverse shot, it is a little tiring. Although I love those wide shots of the car driving and the camera just keeps it right in the center, and
Yeah, that's nice.
those are really, really nice. But all in all, yeah, probably not a movie I would be recommending to people who have just begun their film analysis and interpretation journey, but one that I think is good nonetheless, and I think very well deserving of this prize.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think let's think about it like a big block of marble, right? It's this big, amazing block of marble, but I got just a little chisel, and this hammer is real heavy, and it's like I just swinging the hammer over and over and over again. And I think that this metaphor I've constructed illustrates what I think are the two truths of my experience with the movie, which I have definitely come to appreciate a lot more as we've talked about it for the last however long we've been talking. In that I think that there is a lot of beauty here, and there's a lot of very intentional decisions being made that you can reach for and pull out meaning from, and get quite a lot deeper into than I had initially felt having finished the film, which is maybe the sign of a really enduring piece of work, that there is a lot to mine into. But I just can't escape the fact that chip into with my big hammer. I can't.
No, I was trying to do like a hole digging, like
That's fair.
Earthworks.
Like Shia LaBeouf's holes. Yes.
Yeah, Stanley Yelnats. Yeah.
And there's also no escaping the fact that I literally, on this futon behind me, I'm in such a small window here. I was trying every possible way to sit on this futon that would keep me entertained. Let's lie on let's Jeff Goldblum, let's sit up, let's sit the other way, let's eat some goldfish, whatever I need to do to stay engaged. Let's maybe
Upside
check
down,
Twitter,
feet over the back kind of situation.
kicking my feet like a schoolgirl, maybe check Twitter once or twice. I just don't think that there's any escaping for me the fact that the stylistic repetition, but also the dialogue repetition, which I don't think we really got fully into. I feel like there is this, to the point about poetry, there is this rhythm and form and almost stanza-like quality to how it unfolds. But I think that
ask the question about where you're from. Ask the question about this. Ask the question about that. Say, hey, I got a job for you.
Hey, listen.
Do that about 6 or 7 times.
I think that, again, it reinforces this notion of poetic form, but that is just not, to me, an engaging viewing experience. And I don't need to be watching, what's a really entertaining movie? Transformers: The Dark of the Moon to be engaged, right?
This is not the only Quest movie you've compared to that or referenced that movie.
I just think there's a lot of films that are a lot slower and very deliberate like this, but also maintain, to me, a stronger moment-to-moment tenor than this did.
Yeah. All I'll say is I'd never accuse this film of being unintentional. I've never accused this film of being misguided, and I'll say I'll never even accuse this film of being boring. But shall we learn about the palm details for a moment?
The palm details while we pull up the spreadsheet to give this a score.
Somebody accidentally
Someone
already put
put
their
in their
score
number. Someone
Oh,
put in
uh-oh.
their number already.
That's
Get that
okay.
out of there.
All right.
Get that out of there.
Here we go. We're gonna speed through these. Jury president in 1997 was actress Isabelle Adjani, who you may recognize from the film Possession from 1981. A banger of a film right there. One of the craziest, zaniest, and most engrossing performances from her, I would say, in a horror film, if you characterize Possession that way, because I would. Other notable jury members, a little guy you may have heard of by the name of Tim Burton was on the jury this year. Mira Sorvino, who's an American actress you might know from Woody Allen's Mighty Aphrodite and 2023's Sound of Freedom. Gong Li is a Chinese actress, best known for her roles in Farewell My Concubine, Raise the Red Lantern, and Memoirs of a Geisha. And director Mike Lee, UK director Mike Lee, who's best known for his films Naked and Secrets and Lies. There are 20 films in competition in the 1997 Cannes Film Festival, the 50th annual Cannes Film Festival, by the way. The opening film that year, not in competition, was The Fifth Element by Luc Besson. Notable submissions to the
no way, really?
yeah. The notable submissions also in competition against Taste of Cherry were Funny Games by Michael Haneke, Happy Together by Wong Kar-wai, LA Confidential by Curtis Hanson, The Brave by Johnny Depp, The Ice Storm by Ang Lee, and the co-winner of the Palme d'Or this year. It was split between two films, The Eel by friend of the show, Shohei Imamura.
Oh,
the show.
I think once we review a film, we can call the director a friend of the show.
Sure.
Yeah.
Can I
Let's just
say,
hope that
by
there's
the
no
way,
awful people who won the Palme d'Or.
I'm sure there will be.
I think
I
there
think
probably-
I think there's one of them.
Polanski
that-
won.
I think Polanski won. I'm
Yeah,
pretty
the
sure.
piano.
He won for
Yeah.
the
Let me just say
pianist.
that's a great list of films.
Mm-hmm.
Funny Games in particular, very interesting based on the Wikipedia summary of it that I read.
Sure. It is a
Yeah, I was
distur-
thinking, you haven't seen any
it's
of
a
those.
disturbing film, so Abram has read the Wikipedia
Yeah.
summary of it, and will probably never see the film itself.
I also read the
Closing
summary
film.
of the remake.
Yeah, there you
Original's
go.
Better.
Closing film was a film called Absolute Power by Clint Eastwood. Lots of actor-director films at the festival this year.
Two.
Oh, Johnny. Oh, there was another one that I scratched by Sean Penn.
Oh,
Yeah.
good for him.
Wow. There you have it.
Yes.
The Palm details. Now, let us get to the Palm de score.
It doesn't work out as well. We'll find something.
Okay.
All right, I got mine.
We seem to have some scores ready, and
Can't
we'll
wait for the
find out
palm to spin.
in 3, 2, 1.
Oh, sorry.
We have a number. It is 6.4, the point breakdown, which puts it at the last spot. Place number 5 on our list. The point breakdown is
Hey, top 5.
Tucker.
Not too bad.
Not too bad.
Tucker gave it a 4.8, so the lowest anyone has given a film yet, followed by
We'll get down there, don't worry.
Abrams 6.1, Tanner's 6.6, and I gave it an 8.0. So that averages to 6.4. Fifth spot for Taste of Cherry. Top 5, not too bad.
Not too bad at all. Not too shabby.
We'll see where this sticks on the list, though, because that makes for a bit of a gap between the 4th and 5th place. Some other films could sneak in there and knock this one down eventually. Okay,
Indeed, it could.
all right. Now, let us go to our favorite segment. It's time.
Time for the palm to song.
Palm the song at least rhymes a little bit.
Kind of?
Palm
Palm
the
de score
song.
sounds like Palme d'Or, so it's you have to pronounce Palme
No,
d'Or.
I guess you're
wrong.
right.
Palm
Yeah.
de-
Palme de score, I don't mind.
Okay.
Palm to spin time.
Wheel, what's your deal? Give us a movie that makes us squeal. Is it on digital or is it on real? Wheel, what's your deal?
Ooh, and Wheels Deal is number 9. So I think that's going to be something interesting given our list. Tucker,
Yeah.
what is the 9th film?
This is going to be the oldest film we've watched by like a magnificent margin. This is the 1945 winner of the Palme d'Or.
One of the many, because this is back in the
Oh,
era
this
when
is
they
one
gave
of
them
them.
to like 8 or 10 films every year or whatever.
A film that may be difficult to find.
We'll see.
We're going to do a little research, see if we can actually end up watching this, because only 381 people have logged this on Letterboxd, which is incredibly low.
A bit worrisome.
Yeah, it's a bit worrisome, as in maybe we won't be able to find it.
We'll see.
But this is a film directed by Lauritsen Jr. and Bodil Ibsen, starring Paul Reichhardt, Preben Kass, Lisbeth Movin. This is Red Meadows.
From where in the world?
I have no fucking clue.
Either
maybe Germany.
I don't know. It would not be Germany from
No, it is
1945,
Swedish.
my good sir.
You know what? I'm making educated guesses out here. We're fine. Let's
It's,
do
I
it.
think
Here,
it's.
I have it down on.
Denmark.
Oh, wait, you can do like.
I think it's Denmark
you can
because
do,
it's
like,
about
details.
Danish people.
Denmark.
Yeah,
Yes,
okay,
Denmark.
okay.
Oh yeah, there's slashes through the O's.
It's certainly
I thought that
yeah.
was, but they have in German for a second. So.
They do not have that in Germany.
It's like Swedish too,
Okay,
Could
we're
bend.
good. We are good. It is on Internet Archive.
There we go.
Awesome.
Thank you,
Sure.
Internet Archive. Well, thanks for having an interesting discussion, getting into this movie where we get our artsy fartsy hat on every
It's an
once in a
interesting
while.
We're gonna do it a lot more in this show.
Yeah, that is the trend that we're going to. We'll see. Is Red Meadows artsy fartsy or not? It's an older movie. Haven't watched one of those in a while, so looking forward to that. Thanks for joining me. And as always, we'll see you next week. Until then, stay cool, keep warm. Peace.
I just don't understand. Everybody likes the Paddington films. Everybody likes Timothy Chalamet.
Well,
What am I missing?
I think there is a bit for me, at least, Abram.
I think the premise is annoying.
Yeah, that's fair. I also think that's an
Let's
element.
see how Willie became Wonka.
I don't give a fuck. we gotta have Timo clip that. We gotta have Timo clip that.